Hello everyone and welcome to SHSA TV. My name is Lisa Chavity and I'm a safety advisor at the Service and Hospitality Safety Association. First of all, I just want to say a big thank you to the very modern Courtyard Marriott Hotel for hosting us today. I'm very fortunate to be sitting down with Toby Denim, CEO of the Saskatchewan First Nations Safety Association. Thanks to Toby, Saskatchewan First Nations workers now have an association advocating for their workplace health and safety. The SHSA is very honored to be partnering with Toby and his association, and we are going to be providing training resources, additional materials, and anything that they might need as they venture down this path. I'm very excited to be working with Toby today, so let's go meet up with him. First of all, Toby, thank you very much for joining us today. This is great to have you here with everyone.
Well, thank you. I'm very excited to talk about our association, what some of our services are going to be in the future, and how we come about the Saskatchewan First Nations Safety Association.
Yes, well that's great. Yeah. And why don't we even start off with that by telling us a little bit about yourself and the association as well.
Well, my name is Toby Denim. I am from Papixi's First Nation. My spiritual name is Muskegee Musquewasis. So in our culture, our names are prevalent in our time that we were brought into this reality. So Toby Denim is our contemporary name, and our spiritual name connects us to the universe. So I like to use that when we start off our conversations.
Yes, yeah, that's really good to know. And how about a little bit about your background of how you maybe got to this point?
Our association, starting off, I guess, a little history about myself.
Sure.
I started off working in residential and industrial sites. Working as a worker, I started to develop the sense of what is needed in occupation and health, and how do we relate that to our workers and to our environment in which we deal with on a large basis. So I taken that intrinsic knowledge of the work environment, and I started to develop a sense of what I would like to do within occupation and health. So I started a company called TGD Training Consulting back in 2002. And then that company allowed me to look at what occupation and health was for First Nations and how we could work with respects to training and building capacity and knowledge in that sense. Yeah.
Okay. And going along with that a little bit, how do you think that First Nations people view occupational health and safety?
Well, just like companies that in which I had the great pleasure of working with as a contractor in training national construction safety officers, I understood that their organizations have some understanding of where they want to be in occupation and health. It's just getting them to that next step and helping them develop those processes in the way of learning those processes, right? So one of the things that I've come to understand and started to implement was occupational health training. So I've trained myself with 27 different occupational health certifications and 2 national designations. And then so since that conception of knowledge that I started to gain, I started to see that First Nations within occupation and health, there was some parallels in workers on First Nations and workers off, right? So just bridging that gap to workers on that sense and being an advocate for them and empowering them of the processes that are in place really was a fundamental step for us moving forward. So we really cherish that understanding of non-First Nation systems, and then now just kind of relating that to First Nations organizations.
Okay. Yeah, and with that in mind, what is the mission of your association?
Awesome. So our mission is to empower First Nations to live an injury-free lifestyle, supported by the belief of recapturing risk management and occupation and health directives, safety directives.
Right.
Yeah.
And with talking about an injury-free, how are we going to go about doing that? Do you have some information of resources that are available? And you mentioned your services as well. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So our organization, with our fundamental partners, we've seen a need to build capacity. So how do we build that capacity in First Nations communities and in their organizations and what have you? And our first step was to our public safety awareness strategy. And that now allows us to just pose the question, right? What is safety? How do we look at safety? What does safety mean to the bus driver or the school kid or the band administrator? Right? So we look at just posing the question in our public safety awareness campaign is, what is safety and how does it relate to you and your loved ones?
Yes.
And then building off that strategy is now, how do we now identify, right, what risks are there? And how do we now put into effect the control measures, right? So the hierarchy of control in safety, right? Elimination, substitution, engineer, administrative, and then your last resort, of course, is your personal protective equipment, right?
Yes, that's
so
right.
these systems of control we understand as a good mechanism to develop those practices and procedures and to develop good cultural safety tendencies. So we're in that middle of just developing out our engagement strategy and putting forth with our partners, WorkSafe, that now needs assessment, right? What needs are out there based on our public awareness, right? And putting that into effect. So there's a lot of good developments that are happening.
Yes.
And right now we're going to be visiting 74 First Nations, 11 tribal councils, and businesses on reserve and businesses off reserve. So we can start to just have that dialogue. What does safety mean? How do we identify risks? And how do we control it? And putting those into perspective into a health and safety management program and adequate training, right? At cost or no cost training, right? Supported by the belief that well-informed, right, workers start to perform and start to develop a sense of safety internally, right? And that's what we're looking for.
With all that knowledge too, you mentioned that empowerment piece too. So if they're involved in the health and safety program and they have that knowledge and training, that really does empower them then to go out and spread that to others in the workplace as well.
Absolutely, and I think that's we're starting to fundamentally see these changes in that cultural change of safety, right? So. Looking back at where I started from, right, in residential and industrial work, but being a First Nations person, right, I've taken a different view of our environment and how we are the custodians of our environment and how do we look after our environment in a respectful and of course in a contemporary age, right? So how do we do that moving forward? So one of the major things that I look at is a holistic view of what occupation and health is and how it relates to other people and how it relates to our organization, right, moving forward. So community, right?
Yes,
First Nation is all about community and all about inclusiveness, right? And bringing everybody to the table and finding out what is the best fit for this community, right? As just being, I guess, the planting seeds of occupation and health and watching them grow into beautiful trees.
And just really being a resource as well for everyone that has a question. It's always okay to ask questions, so that's what you're here for as well.
Absolutely. I think one of the major things, and you hit on it just perfect, is the public safety awareness, right? And then advocacy, right? That advocacy, and then training, and then management, right? Some of our guiding principles that we use. So that advocacy is, one of the fundamental things is, who do you call if you have a question, right? How do we be that middle person for the worker, the employer, right? When he wants to know what occupational health laws are, right? The regulations, if they're working off the reserve in public land, right? So all these different questions, we can mitigate those and help them define those.
Yeah, that's great. And I know your association is just in the beginning stages right now, but where would you like to see the association in 5 years?
Yeah, in 5 years. So we're well on our way with our strategic partners. We have 10 already. Strategic partners. We just signed a partnership MOU with Finning, Caterpillar Canada, and we really see that need of good partners moving forward, utilizing their expertise, right? And I always use this as, why reinvent the wheel, right? The system's already there, the people are already in place. We have the same dynamic of workers on First Nations, water treatment plant operators, there's schools, there's band offices, there's infrastructure, capital infrastructure, there's road maintenance, there's basically everything a municipal services have, but on First Nations. So understanding that dynamic of work and that work environment, just bringing that awareness on that level really helps kind of give a good insight to occupation and health. But then now it kind of stretches out to the community, to public safety awareness, right? What do we look at safety as, and how do we mitigate those risks? Because back in the many moons ago, right, First Nations people mitigated our risks from day one. So what did that mean, right? How did we mitigate risk, right? How did we put it into perspective of where to hunt, where to fish, where to gather, where's the medicine, right? How do we understand those dynamics? So those are intrinsic skills, right, that we all have of to mitigate risk. It's just now putting those points into a contemporary society, and how does that look, right? How can we translate that information over and put that into perspective? So that's what our association wants to do as well, is to keep that conscious way of life and spirituality that First Nations intrinsically have, and now bring it out in a contemporary way in occupation and health. And how do we mitigate those processes at the band level or organization level or business level? And just be that bridge, I guess, to that information, right?
That's great. And is there any message or anything that you'd like to leave the viewers with today?
Well, I think, moving forward, occupation and health and public safety awareness is an understanding that humans should have, rather than an organization behavior or organization structure of institution. I think that we should think more of a occupation as a human value, and safety as a cultural change in how we do our business, right? So looking at the human first, and building that knowledge and that awareness and that intrinsic skills that they have, and allowing them to experience what true security and safety means for themselves, right? Because that's what all workers really are trying to strive for, is to come home every day safe, right? To go to work, right? Come home to your family, right? I think that's the overall premise that everybody strives for as workers.
Yes, that's very important to remember in our everyday lives too, as we're going about our work day, but then, like you say, bringing that home and into the community as well.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you very much again for joining us today. That was great.
Excellent. Well, thank you.
Thank you all very much for joining us today. Thank you to Toby and the Saskatchewan First Nations Safety Association, and as well to the Courtyard Marriott Hotel in Saskatoon for hosting us. If you have any additional questions, please feel free to email us at info@servicehospitality.com. And make sure you watch our website for future episodes.